It's time to get started. My name is Stephen Borg, and I'm joined today with
my name is Anjani.
And we're both from the Azure DevOps team at Microsoft. Now that's a product team, so we're both on the product team. And we work on a product called Boards inside of that. We'll talk a little bit about Boards as we go. Demo focused predominantly, but more so engagement. If you have questions, jump in and ask them. Don't hesitate. We can show really boring demos. We can show great demos. We can show different things. We can answer questions. Talked with Vincent a little bit. He has some questions about digital transformation and why you might want to use a suite of tools, potentially like Azure DevOps, to help. I will say, tools will never solve your problems. If you have a cultural issue with your digital transformation, tools won't help. But tools can get in your way. So you do want tools that stay out of your way as well. A little bit of background before I get started. I used to work for a company called 10th Magnitude, who I'm proud to say was the 2018 Open Source DevOps Partner of the Year, in part because of the partnership with Chef. And I'm really pleased to get a chance to speak here today. I left that position and joined Microsoft just 8 weeks ago.
Yep.
8 weeks ago, and became the product owner for Azure Boards. So I'm very proud to talk about Azure Boards as well, but also honored to be here and talk to you all. And Anjani, I'll let you do a quick introduction right now. If you would.
So I am Anjani Chandan, and then basically I am mostly in the product group. I work for there's a suite called Azure Boards. I basically work as a senior engineer in that part of Azure DevOps. So I will probably be helping Stevenson in the demos. So I'll let him continue from here. Okay.
Absolutely, thank you. I'm just going to briefly hit a couple things. If you don't know this, you're probably not at the right conference. So people, process, tools, working together. If you are part of the Chef community, you are part of the people who have been driving this kind of shift in thinking in the marketplace. this number is crazy, right? 2,604 times faster for high-performing industries and high-performing organizations than low-performing organizations to get to recovery when there's an error in production, some live site incident in production. That's pretty amazing. Now, these are some of the things that come out of the DORA metrics, the DevOps report. One of the things that amazes me is the depth at which this community has participated in that. Chef was early on in that and has really driven a lot of those changes. Microsoft has also been there, and we'll talk a little bit about what we do. The Azure DevOps toolchain is made up of 5 main components and then some back-end stuff as well. Azure Boards, this is a work tracking and work delivery tool. Think of it as Trello, Jira, that kind of a thing. Azure Pipelines, this is the CI/CD component to the tool chain. Azure Repos, unlimited cloud hosting, Git repositories. It used to be our compete with GitHub. Then Microsoft acquired GitHub, and now it's all confusing. But you can choose either one of these. We still host it internally, or you can go to GitHub. Azure Test Plans, test and ship with confidence is your manual testing suite. And Azure Artifacts, where you can share packages with your team. Think of Maven and those sorts of things. And we'll go into a little bit on each of these. Interestingly, we've been on a journey towards DevOps at Microsoft since 2010. It's been a long journey. We're 9 years in. And as one of the things that we do, we have one product, dirty little secret, that my team does not dog food. Azure Test Plans. We no longer do formal manual testing. We've moved all of our testing to the point of commit. You commit your code, all of the tests execute, the unit tests execute, merges into master automatically. Once we hit master, we run a whole suite of integration tests. And if all those tests pass, it is eligible to go to production. We don't push all of those things to production. So this is the one thing we don't any longer dog food. And that's a point of pride a little bit for me. But we'll talk more of these things as we go through. given the news on Chef and the way they're responding to open source, how many here contribute to open source? Chunk. You're from Chef. Microsoft is now the largest contributor to open source projects on GitHub. We've got thousands of people working in GitHub for that, myself included. It's something we care deeply about. In fact, the two pieces we're going to demo today out of Azure Pipelines, specifically with Chef, are Azure Boards and Azure Pipelines. And pipelines, for those of you who are involved in open source on GitHub, you have unlimited free build minutes for any open source project you have. That can amount to millions of hours of compute on Microsoft's backend, and in fact it does. So up to 10 free parallel jobs across Windows, Linux, and Mac. So I'll show off a little bit, but we've got a commitment to open source. Yeah, I just talked about that. I want to hit very briefly a couple things, and then I'm going to go into more. We'll go into a demo, and then I'm going to transition into looking at the way we develop inside of Microsoft as well. Azure Boards, this is the Kanban board that flows things through. New, active, staging, deployed, to-do, doing, live, whatever you want to call your path through it. How many of you work in a flow environment where you're looking at, you get to start, you get to finish, you measure cycle time, you try to limit your work in process to get things to fly through really quickly? Kanban, Scrum, Jira for that? You Jira for that as well? Okay. See, but it's that visualization where you're trying to flow things through. For years, I came out of the lean and agile transformation at the enterprise level. That's my background. One of the most powerful things that I've seen is adherence to some form of limiting work in process with Kanban. Whether it be through a tool like Jira, whether it be through a tool like Azure Boards, or whether it be a physical board, a physical thing on the wall with sticky notes that get moved. That engagement can be enormously, enormously powerful. So that's one of the tools in that integrated suite. Pipelines. I mentioned earlier, it's any cloud. This is any language, any platform, any cloud, on target, locally, et cetera. We'll do a quick demo of this in just a few minutes. Kubernetes, cloud native, whatever you want to run and whenever you want to deploy, it deploys. It didn't launch that long ago, and already it's the world's largest cloud-hosted CI/CD pipeline service. Azure Repos, we talked about, works with Git. If you want to have this, bring your code here, bring as much as you want. Unlimited private repos. Azure Test Plans, we talked about very briefly as well. It allows you to test across the desktop. And Azure Artifacts. I just want to tell one little story. Windows uses Azure Artifacts in the back end. And they run a lot of builds every day. And recently, Azure Artifacts went through a failover exercise. They were moving some of their data from one Azure data center to another Azure data center. And I was talking with Alex, my peer, on Artifacts, and somebody was kind of grilling him. What's taking you so long? I mean, you started this effort like a week ago. How come everything's moved over? He looked at the Windows team and said, do you know how many containers of hard drives we have to ship to get it from one place to another? It's 151 petabytes of data, which is a chunk that the Windows throwing out there. That's a lot of Azure consumption as well. I'm not one for slides and for marketing. I'd rather do Q&A and I'd rather do demos. So I want to shift gears. And Anjani, I'd like you to come up if you would. And we're going to walk through a little bit of a demo of using GitHub, using pipelines, and using Azure Boards to work together to deliver some changes into back-end infrastructure.
Yeah. So hi, everybody. I'm Anjani. And I'm going to really show a very complex demo. I don't think it will be complete in time, so let's start. The scenario here is basically I have a Chef server already running. So in the previous sessions, people have shown you how can you use Azure to deploy a Chef server. So I already have a Chef server running on Azure VM. And the demo basically here is like I have a very complex cookbook, which is Hello World cookbook. What it does, it just create a hello world.txt and it just write hello world. And the scenario here is the developer basically got a task saying there's some bug in this and you need to fix that. And and for that, he has got some task assigned. So you can see like this is our Azure boards where we have some tasks saying fix the hello world cookbook. So that developer has seen, okay, now I have to start working on this, and this is the work he is assigned to. Like notice that this ID of this work item is 10. So I will just go and then fix this cookbook and then see how the CI/CD pipeline have been set up to deploy this cookbook is updated on a Chef server. So if you notice currently, it shows cookbook uploaded 4 times. So once I run this, probably it should be 5. Let's see how it goes. So the developer goes and say, okay, now I have a task which is in the doing state. I'm working on this task which is ID 10, and let's fix this cookbook. I will just make some good fixes here. Oh, it's fixed now.
You gotta love hello world,
I just
right?
just want to, for the purpose of simplicity, I just did that. So now I will say cookbook is fixed. It fixes. So here basically I will use GitHub mentions and I will say AV has 10, which means basically this commit will fix this work item which is already assigned to the developer. And once I submit this change, ideally it should go into done state because the developer has fixed that. And the CI/CD pipeline which I already have set up, here basically this should kick in. So there should be something running once I do complete the check-in. So let's do the check-in now. So I just completed this thing, and you could see here, this guy has moved to done state now. It has moved from doing, because that task is done. More to that, you can see like it says like one build has already been queued because the CI/CD pipeline have been set up. So this is a task, and it started running that, the cookbook update command which it has executed, started executing. So you can just see it is just printing hello world and just running one command of chef, which is upload the cookbook. Once this is done, it will just say the server is updated and the version like number has gone from 4 to 5. So let it complete. It's just showing all the logs. This is basically our pipelines thing which just shows everything. Now it's I think it's done. So let's refresh this page and see like this should be updated now. Yeah, you can see here this has been gone from 4 to 5. So you would see like I have a GitHub repo where I have a cookbook. I updated that and a CI/CD pipeline setup. Once you do the check-in, the work item is complete, and then the task has run, and basically it has done the very complex task of just putting that number here. So to talk further about that, like currently it is using the YAML-based pipeline, and so if you know like in case of Azure DevOps like pipeline, we have bunch of tasks for Chef. So if you go to a new account, I think I already installed extension, so I think let's go here. So if you go here and try to add a task, you can see there is something called Chef. Let me just, yeah. You can see here there is a task called Chef integration, which is you can get it for free. Once you install this to your account, you will get all the tasks which basically I have in my other account. Just install it from here. So for a time purpose, I just use my other account where I have already installed that. It's very simple. Like you just say install it. It's that simple. So once you install that, probably you go to your release and then see, okay, now you have bunch of tasks related to Chef, and you can use all of them. Like you can install Chef DK, you can do bunch of Chef related tasks, and it's like everything basically is there, and you can just run from here. Yeah, so this is all about I have for the demo purpose, and then probably I will let.
How many of you are on GitHub? How many of you develop private code on GitHub? Not just open source, but private code on GitHub? A good chunk. Do you mind just popping up the marketplace in GitHub and showing the how you hook these things together? Because if you're working on GitHub, you probably aren't going to be using the Git repos that come out of Azure DevOps. But you may want those pipelines available, and you may want to do it with a private account. So right up from the GitHub marketplace.
Just a minute. Yeah, let me open the GitHub.
Yep. And we'll go to the GitHub marketplace, and you can search for a couple things. Azure Boards, And there it is.
Yeah, so you can see there are a couple of extensions already been published, and let's see where is the, yeah, it's in a trending chart. Like Azure Boards is an extension which is there in the trending chart now, and you can just search for the Azure pipelines as well. If you search it here, and you can install that Azure pipeline. Yep. You can see here these apps are there in the Azure Marketplace. You can install that and you can have build this integration. So in my demo, I already have installed that. So probably that's why it's already stitched up together very well.
And if you happen to be using GitHub, your GitHub identifier works right across into this. You don't need a Microsoft ID or anything like that as you move it across. I want to talk a little bit now on how these things stitch together. Do you have anything else you wanted to cover first?
No, I'm done.
Okay, I wanted to make sure that before. One of the things that I want to talk about is why you might want to use something other than just chef scripts running locally on your thing that you trigger with the command line. I saw so many demos, and it's just an incredible amount of power. But a lot of times you want to connect up things to your work tracking system. You want to understand, how does this correlate back to what I'm building? What are the value prop that I'm delivering with this change into production? You may want a continuous integration pipeline to build and deploy these things. And those sorts of things can be done relatively easily inside of Azure Pipelines. I'm going to pick on one particular. Just one moment. I'm going to pick on one particular product that Microsoft just launched. It was inside of Microsoft, we have one group called One Engineering Systems. And as part of Azure Boards and Azure Pipelines, we support the One Engineering System at Microsoft. We have about 85,000 builds per day that flow through into some kind of production or test environment. But there's a couple places that need giant build servers and services. This is Build XL. This comes out of the need for the Windows place to build a lot. They've got many thousands of machines constantly running, doing builds 24 hours a day. In order to coordinate that, they use something that they've open sourced as Build XL. So I want to tie in how a company that might not be open source, that's a private GitHub repo, can share and work with open source as well. So in this particular case, Microsoft open source Build XL, but I'm going to look over and take a peek at one of the issues. You know, if you're an open source, or a pull request rather, if you are an open source product, the way you get interaction from your community is primarily through issues on GitHub, if you're hosted on GitHub. So there's this interaction that goes back and they tell a story. But in the case of Microsoft, we have things that are running in our One Engineering system as well. And that's not all public. That's private. We want to keep that private. So in this particular case, they've kept it relatively private. And you can see this link back to AB pound 1,533,410. This is a work item that's linked in there. They start at 1, so they do a lot of work items. Let me quickly open that up in a new tab. And this is what it looks like when you open it up inside now of Azure DevOps. We're inside of the board. We have all of the things, and we're trying to determine in this release that we've made, this change to GitHub, what can we do in order to get telemetry injected into this app so that we can fix a problem with Office projects and slices. So you won't be able to see this when you pop in and link to it, but the idea is there's a private repository, public repository, and what we pull inside of Microsoft to use this, we build it off Azure Pipelines, and we consume it off of our open source library. So we consume and eat our own open source here while we are building for something that's as large as and complex as Windows. We showed a lightweight little bit of Azure DevOps in the demo, in a Hello World demo. And I'd like to walk through a little bit of how we use it in production. And sometimes this gets shown in keynotes. If you've seen it before, raise your hand or let me know. But I want to walk through how we use it internally. Let me use WIT-Z as a team. So you'll see Anjani here.
Yeah.
There you are. This is internal. Work assigned to Stephen Borg. I have no work. But I would be classified as overhead and underfoot, I suppose. But you'll see these are the team that Anjani is on. And here are the active bugs and who they're assigned to and working through. And we run at an active bug count cap. We do not let teams exceed a count of roughly 4 bugs per engineer. But you can see the delivery, active bugs by priority and how it's gone, trends, where our issues are, what are people currently working on, what's our cumulative flow for the last 3 sprints. And this is how we use it all internally. I want to jump over and take a look at a couple things. This is actually what people are working on. There's bugs. This is an LSI, a live site incident, something going on in production. And you can see, a lot of different things that are done. I could filter out and find what you've been working on here soon, too.
I'm not working today, I'm here.
You're here, you're not working today. But I want to show you a couple things and why this is important. As you're making a transition, you're here to ChefConf. You're not here just for automating your infrastructure. The drive behind all of these technologies, these techniques, is to get to a digital transformation, to get to a lean and agile transformation, to get to agile transition, whatever you want to call it. But it's this highly effective collaboration between development and operations. And what I absolutely love about this team, and I'll pick on your team.
Yeah, it's okay.
They own everything. We got rid of testers at Microsoft, as many of you know. That's the wrong term. We integrated testers with our developers, and we call them engineers now. Didn't get rid of them. We integrated them into their team, and now we just have engineering. We take product management. We bring that into the mix. We take design. We bring that into mix. And we take operations and bring that into the mix. When something goes wrong in production, who gets a call?
Yeah, it's lifesite person basically.
It's the lifesite person, which is you. You're on that rotation. Not today, because you're here, but you're on that rotation, right? It's the team that gets it. So I want to talk about how valuable that is, but I want to talk about another piece. If I look, this is what they have delivered in the past 6 months. They had delivered 6,856 thingies to production, and now, 6 months later, they've delivered 7,856. It's a little bit above that. But basically, they've delivered 1,000 things, 170 a month, in the last 6 months. Think about how we allocate resources in organizations. Think about the overhead that goes into building and funding and deploying applications in an organization. I came out of a banking institution, a bank, and when they moved from their year-long budgeting cycles, and they moved it into beyond budgeting. It's a technique for lean budgeting. And as part of that, each major product area went in front of a board, a group of people for funding, and they popped this chart up. And they said, in the last 6 months, we've deployed 1,000 things. They would then open up their backlog and literally scroll down their backlog. I'm embarrassed that they had this many items on their backlog, but they would scroll down their items to hit the 1,000 item mark. And they would literally say, here's our prioritized backlog. If you don't mess with us, we will give you all of these things in the next 6 months. And that changes the dynamic inside of each and every team. So they went from spending almost a month every year in building projects and saying, here's my estimate of how much each project is going to take, to almost 0 time with that definition. And that's what you get in that transformation. It goes well beyond simply the building and the automation. It brings you all the way to potentially changing the way you do business. I should go into pipelines a little bit more. Here are pipelines that are being executed as we speak. Let me just refresh that. These are pipelines inside of Azure DevOps. You can see we have pull request 1 running. We have the pull request CI running for MMS. We have our build rules. These are all builds that are currently executing inside of our team. Our team is about 450 engineers, about 650, 700 folks. And if I look over here, I can see all of the builds, when it reloads, I can see all of the builds that are currently have been executed today. And this is another shift and change in the way we've done work as we've moved to a more DevOps style engagement.
And just to add, this dashboard is there on all our rooms, okay, it's all good, green, like everybody's monitoring this, and this is very much visible to everybody in the organization. So this is what we project.
Every time there's a pull request, we go to master, if it successfully passes its unit tests. And then every time we have a pull request, we also do run a suite of tests. You can see here are what's running today. If I float over here, this is May 21st. We are currently at our 66th check-in to production today. And these tests are still executing. And what I want to reflect back is what kind of power you can get when you start to pay attention to your infrastructure. When you start to not treat your infrastructure as a test environment somewhere, but as something that's just disposable. If I look at any of these tests and float over, I'm going to see how many tests were executed in this run. So this ran, deployment succeeded, 57,819 L0, basically unit tests, ran and completed. They all passed. We can drill into it. But notice this. The test duration was 5 minutes and 9 seconds. The deployment duration was 20 minutes and 3 seconds. We used to not be able to test our application inside of a day. The entire test suite was 20. We were able to squeeze it under 22 hours with heroics, right? Now, every single commit to production, to master, gets its own suite of environments. In Azure, this is an environment, that's an environment, that's another environment, that's another environment, that's another environment. In other words, we spin up the entire Azure DevOps stack from scratch, 15 times, 16 times for every single commit. Build it, execute it, throw it away. Just throw it away. And then we do that 100 and some times every single day. So that's thousands of these things being spun up in a week, just tens of thousands in a week. What has that done for us? Are we recorded? No, I'll say it anyway with just hopes we're not. They're usually recorded. Rumor has it that back in the day, when we didn't have this, and we had physical test machines, we only had 500 test machines, which is a trivial amount for a product our size, and we ran those 22-hour tests. Rumor has it that running that 365 days a year, we never once got a clean test run over the course of 8 years. So to release Visual Studio, the big thing, and Team Foundation Server, we had to go to some VP somewhere and say, are you willing to sign this? Are you willing to take the risk that we let this out the door? And that sucks really, really badly. Nothing gets into master, things break in master all the time, but nothing gets into production now without our entire suite of tests passing 100%. There's not a chance we will ever ship anything that hasn't passed all of the tests that are our known problems. And when we run into a new problem, we build a test for it like everyone else does, and then we never have that problem again. But you look, oh please, tell me we have some failures. Oh, there we go. Woo! It's about to scroll off. So we have a failure here, right? And we can drill in, and we can see in this test a couple things. We had.
Yes, I think some step has.
Oh, someone canceled it maybe. Yeah. Aborted test. Anyway, we do have 803 unique failing tests in the last 14 days. So we can drill into that and find out what those tests are. But the shift and the change to the way we build and deploy software has been tremendous. And one of the things I want to mention before I go further is that change defines how we even think about software and how we even think about hardware. It's a big change. Let me show one last thing here. And that's if I drop over here, this is an example of this is just a pipeline, which we showed earlier. And we showed just a very, very simple pipeline. Just a boom, you commit code, a pipeline runs. They don't have to be trivial. They don't have to be simple. And this is an example of the release for our analytics product that runs in the back end. And you can see we go into ring 0, and there's a wait task here, and then we deploy out to a couple different environments. And then it's in ring 0. That means we see it. We dog food it. We don't test anymore. We mentioned we don't do manual testing, right? So all of our testing runs at code commit. This is our chance to make sure that we're not hosing up anybody else, right? So it comes in, we deploy it to ring 0, and now everybody inside of Microsoft gets to play with it. And they dog food that in the engineering team. About 97,000 engineers use it daily. And then we go to ring 1, and we deploy out to a little bit more people. These are some of our MVP community and some of the community of people who are like, hey, get me in on the latest stuff. I don't care if it breaks. And we still try not to break them. Get out to rings 2, 3, 4, and 5. And it flows through that process as we go. And one of the things we learned is you can put conditions on things. So like we've got a trigger. The trigger is an automatic trigger. It'll go in. Or we can say we have a pre-deployment approval that we want someone to like manually come in and say, yeah, I want this to go. And we often use a manual trigger as we're going into production, as we're rolling through. But there's a couple other things that we can do. And one of the things that I have really appreciated, we don't use it here, but it's our gates. And so, a couple of the things we can do is we can add a deployment gate. We can say, hey, wait 5 hours before you do anything, or wait 5 minutes or 10 minutes. But add a gate to that, and the gate can be check Azure policy compliance, see if it's valid, invoke a REST API. We can go right to inspect. We can go right to any of the Chef things and say, don't do anything if we're broken. Don't push it to the next ring if we're not. Cousteau is another one, ServiceNow. I'd like to see more. We're eventually putting in more of these. Right now, we interoperate with Chef primarily through REST APIs and invoking functions. But there's no reason that can't change. And
yeah,
you brought up a great one. I'm going to let you tell it.
Yes, just to add, basically there are gates like Twitter gate. Like suppose you want to have a Twitter gate added in this, and then you can say, okay, the deployment goes out, and somebody says, okay, this is not working, this is crap, this is breaking something. So sentiments goes down. So that gate basically monitor that and say, okay, now sentiment is not good, let's not proceed further. So we can add that kind of gates also and say Twitter is basically like sentiment analysis of Twitter basically will help you to decide whether you want to go further or not. So there are many kind of other plugins which you can use to proceed further and block basically or basically block there. So there are a bunch of interesting things there.
And I'll tell you, as we've moved into this world where everything's configuration is code, or configuration is software, depending on how you want to say it, we've learned that sometimes deploying things breaks stuff. And sometimes it's really hard to determine what's broken, what's not. Cousteau is the query language we use to gather. It's our big data ingestion tool, and then we query out of that. But with Cousteau, one of the things we do is when data flows in and we make a shift to a new, we're going to deploy onto a new piece of software. We're going to do some A/B testing on it. We're going to run them both in production. We're looking at just the raw statistics on the server. Just the statistics. Not just failures, but how many requests per second are we getting? How many of those are requests for version control? How many are work items? How many are this? How many are that? And why do we do that? Because no change we make is a big transformative change. They tend to be small changes. So one of the queries that comes back before we push out, in some instances, is just to say, make sure that the changes are statistically similar, the behavior of the machines and the behavior of the system is statistically similar between these two. If all of a sudden we find nobody on this machine is editing any work items, we probably have a problem. They're statistically different. There's an anomaly between them, and we can flag that and stop it. So these are the things that I'm soapboxing a little bit, but I just want to throw that out there. Questions? I want to get to questions. Yeah.
So earlier you outlined combining a bunch of very different job categories or types. About how long would you say that took to reintegrate after having been siloed those separate job classes into the same team, do you think?
How long? What would be your estimation?
Yeah, I don't know what guess I can make there, but yeah.
It was years.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not easy. We're still going through some of those learnings,
Sure.
a lot of those learnings, but because we're not there. You're never at Agile,
Yeah.
right? We're only, but we've gotten it much more tightly integrated. We've just recently brought design into that group as well. So having actual designers helping get into the brains of our users and figure out how to best build navigation and paths and solutions to that.
Cool.
Took a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there any other collaboration between, that you could show that could collaborate between two different teams? Like there's a dependency on one, let's say Ring 4, 5 is another person that has an integration with your software or your microservice or whatever.
Sure.
And the other team is doing their thing. Can you see both of their work and put items and issues on each other?
We do that, very much so. In fact, the product that we're on, there's 5 teams, and I generally look at the overview of all 5 teams as a roll-up against them, but then sometimes I'll drill into each team. But then the teams themselves also can put dependencies on each other's boards, basically, where they're prioritized. One of the things we've learned, and this is, I'm going to soapbox for just a second, and I'll turn it over if you have a question, is don't depend on it. We've spent 8 years trying to break down the dependencies, the architectural dependencies between parts of the architecture so that we have fewer and fewer and fewer dependencies between teams. Our teams are co-located, they work together in the same room, and hopefully they don't have a lot of dependencies outside of that room.
But sometimes that's the work that you need to do so you can consolidate.
Yes, sometimes you have to do it. Yeah, when you have a big vision that flows down, absolutely you have to do it. But we've tried to break break the hard dependencies. We'd like to be able to go to production without having a dependency. We don't want to block moving to production. If we can't go to production multiple times a day, we have to worry about it.
And just to add that, basically, when you talk about rings, they are all basically for a microservice. When we say analytics is a microservice, which basically independently exists. And then we talk about Azure boards, that's also a microservice. So they basically interact seamlessly between them, being a microservice. So they all deploy in rings independently, and then the interaction basically works together like because of microservice being there.
So there will be an integration in this ring at a ring time, like whatever ring level they're at, there is an integration process there.
Yeah. So as a dev, basically, I can say they are based on a framework, and then basically that framework takes care of that dependency, whether you are on this milestone or that milestone, and then that milestone compatibility will take care of, okay, I can talk and basically work together at what levels. If you are n-1 or n-2, that way basically it helps and works. So.
Yeah. Other questions? Yeah.
I noticed in one of the Azure boards demos that you had like an issues view instead of like features. Are those issues that are submitted through like the GitHub side of the project, or is that a separate?
Would you like them to be?
Yeah. Because we have issues in a repo that we have on GitHub that we build using Azure CI.
Yeah.
But we get issues from the public community on the repo, and then we just have like a separate Azure boards item that we open up to mirror the item there. So I didn't know if that was like part of the workflow, just because I'd never seen that issues view before.
I wish. And we're heading that direction. That's a really, really important direction for us to head. So thanks for the market research on that piece.
Yeah.
Note taken. Grab me seriously. I want to leave you with one last thing. As you're going through, how many of you are legitimately going through kind of a digital transformation or some type of movement across A few.
Yeah.
How many of you are not? See, I always ask a binary question because that just kind of lets me know. If you are going through one, from years of experience, one of the most important things is limiting your work in process. And I'm just going to, this is nothing to do with here. Find a way to aggressively prioritize and remove work from your system. Just flat out, get work out. I've never been in an organization that has too little work in process. It's almost always too much. The reason for that, it is magic fairy dust. I was a consultant for years. Chef has consultants that reach out, other places. And when you go out, 10th Magnitude has consultants. And if you can convince a customer to reduce their work in process, they focus and move faster, bugs drop, automation starts actually happening, communication between teams starts actually happening. This multitude of wonderful things kicks out of it. It is literally magic fairy dust. If I could leave you with one thing, regardless of the tool you use, reduce that work in process. And then have fun with it. One of the slides that we never got to is just quotes from customers who say, we love Azure DevOps. But one of them is an airline. And what's so fun about the airline is, for those of you who have a Kanban board, we talk about limiting work in process, and you put limits on the work in process columns. That stops people from overloading stuff and doing too much. I was walking through, it happened to be in Honolulu, and I was walking through one of their bases, the boards, and they had stickies they were moving across. As I walked through, they had a whip limit on their done column. I was thinking they have no clue what's going on. This has got to be a problem. So I said to the manager who was walking me by, I said, you've got a whip limit on your done column. And he said, yeah, we don't show the beer column. I was like, tell me more about the beer column. And he said, well, when we hit 10 items in done, we just pull them all off, we go to the pub downstairs, everybody, we buy 2 rounds of beer or wine or whatever people want to drink for everybody on the team, and we retrospect. It's like, that's pretty cool. Because they moved from Kanban to Scrum to Kanban, and they didn't have that cadence of a retrospective. I said, that's really neat. You get that retrospective and that cadence. That's a fun thing you can do on a Kanban board. And he said, yeah, not why we did it, but yeah. So at this point, I'm like, well, why did you do it? What drove you to do that? And he said, well, in order to get something to the done column, it has to be in production and used by either a passenger, a flight attendant, a pilot, somebody. It has to have been used at least once to get to the done column. He said, when we started, everybody was building these big, giant features. They'd get their business analysts, the equivalent of their business analysts, and they would create these big, giant things that took weeks to get across. Well, all of a sudden, instead of 3 months to fill up 10 items, everybody gets together and they game the system. Right? They game the system. How? By building smaller and smaller units of value and pushing them through the system faster and faster. Right? Basically, they let their developers and their testers and their business analysts and all of whatever their named entities were, all of those people were encouraged to fall into the pit of success. That's the kind of things you do as part of this transformation. I'm really proud to be part of a tool that can help support that, but I want to stress the most important thing is that cultural aspect of limiting your work in process and really focusing on how your teams are interacting, how dev and operations are interacting. Any last thoughts?
Yeah, just to say, we build the product and then we use ourselves very heavily. So I think if we trust that, probably it's good to people also outside to trust that. So that's what basically my last thought on this to say.
Yeah, we dog food the crud out of that thing, with the exception of test plans.
Yeah.
Any integration with Bitbucket.
Yep.
So from the pipelines piece, yeah, you can pull from anywhere.
And that's not limited to Bitbucket. You can just write your own extensions to integrate with anything, basically. It's just there are a bunch of things already as a first-party extensions, but you can just build any extensions to connect and basically connect. Yeah, it's already there.
Yeah, Bitbucket's kind of a primary one.
Yeah.
But if you had some non-primary one,
Correct.
you could find it. Last question. I'm here afterwards.
Yep.
I'd like to break for everyone, and then if you have questions, you want to come up, feel free to come up and ask, and we'll talk later. Thank you very
Okay,
much for coming.
thanks for
We'll see
coming.
you.